And so it's kind of like getting them not indoctrinated, because they're already so indoctrinated with the goals and criteria and everything else, but it gives them an opportunity to know religious of the Sacred Heart, but also to figure out for themselves how they're going to help us carry the mission of the Society of the Sacred Heart forward into the future. And so I can't say enough about how wonderful they were. And we didn't even have all the schools represented because some of them were going through Chicago, the Sacred Heart Commission on Goals, and they didn't have anybody who wanted to leave. But it really was a fabulous time, and so I might say a little bit more about that as we go. You know, November, as you well know, all of you, we celebrate two great feasts. We celebrate the Feast of All Saints on the 1st of November, and then we celebrate the Feast of All Souls. In my head and in my heart, and probably for as long as I can remember, probably since the time I was old enough to think for myself, I'm not quite sure why we have both of those. Because in the end, the communion of saints is meant to be for those of us who are both living and dead. Those of us on earth are united with those who have gone before us. And so it's all about the communion of saints. So, you know, that got me thinking about some of the stuff I've been up to these days. And I thought, I'd like to talk about 4 holy women who graced the city of New Orleans and Louisiana. I was known to say to the students at the Rosary once, I gave a chapel, did they ever wonder why so many saints had come through New Orleans? And whether or not we needed it in New Orleans. You know, we have another reputation. We can be a holy city, but we can also be great sinners in need of. And just as I was passing on Britannia yesterday, was showing at the Britannia Theater, but the movie Sinners. So anyway, so I want to talk about 4 holy women. And of course, you won't be surprised at the first one on my list. And I didn't do this in preference. I did this based upon their time in Louisiana, okay? And I'm not going to, I don't want to say by choosing these 4 that I negate some of the other holy people that are around. You know, I know there's a great devotion to the cause of Charlene Richard, and that in New Orleans would be Blessed Francis Sealos is another great cause that we have going on in New Orleans. But these are people that I want to talk a little bit about, and you're going to be really surprised about some of this. So, of course, Philippine is the first person on my list, but it's also because Philippine is the first one really to make a presence here in Louisiana, in that she arrived in New Orleans in 1818 on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and most of us who are familiar with her know that the first thing she did when she hit the bank of the Mississippi River was to get on the ground and to kiss the ground, because she had finally arrived where her heart had been longing for years and years and years. You might also know that Philippine visited this campus twice. I always like to say she wasn't quite fond of this place because she didn't like the heat, she didn't like the mosquitoes. And I just was with all these young people at Florissant, and I had been at St. Charles a week and a half before, and had the opportunity to pray at her sarcophagus. And I always love when I'm in St. Charles because the students leave us cards that they write us a message about something, and mine said, I hope you have time to visit the Round House. Well, the Round House is where Philippine was originally buried. And so it makes my heart warm that this 6th grader finds that spot on the campus a very special space. So you see the legacy gets continued. So what I want to tell you about Philippine is that she met Sophie Barra in 1804, and Father Varin, who was a Jesuit who helped Sophie Barra found the society, said that she would be worth going to the ends of the earth to find, because that was the kind of stellar person that she was. In their way of being, I don't think you could find 2 more different women, but I think they also had a deep friendship, and they shared a love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. She had a lifelong passion to serve the Native Americans, and Sister Landry, who's in New Orleans, always reminds me that she did not come on that Rebecca by herself. That she had 4 companions, and we never named the 4 companions. But I will tell you one of them, because one of them is the person who founded this institution, and that's Eugenie O'Day. That was one of Philippine's 4 companions. So anyway, they arrived on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, as I said, on May 29th, 1818. And she spent 6 weeks with the Ursulines preparing for the trip to St. Charles. And I said the thing about Grand Coteau. She founded the first free school west of the Mississippi. And she's responsible for the establishment of all Sacred Heart schools throughout North and South America, because everything expanded from here. And actually, you could even say that the foundation in New Zealand is attributed, because the foundation from New Zealand was made from the southern province in this country. So she was canonized in 1988, and what you might not know is that at the time of her canonization, she was only what was classified as the 4th American saint. Not so long ago, really, if you think about it. What's even more fascinating to me is that you're going to hear about another woman, Frances Xavier Cabrini. She was canonized in 1946, and it wasn't until, I think, the 1970s that 2 other Americans were canonized, John Newman and Elizabeth Seton. Elizabeth Seton is the first American-born saint. Cabrini was a naturalized saint. There was lots of conversation at the time of anticipating her canonization, Philippines, about whether or not Philippine was an American saint. She was being claimed by the Archdiocese of St. Louis, and rightfully so. And the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Philippine is their patron saint. She resided in a territory when she arrived in Missouri, and when Missouri became a state, anyone who was residing in the territory automatically became an American. So she is an American citizen, even though she never applied for citizenship. She didn't have to. And I said recently, and if you doubt that, I wish some of the people who were alive when this happened, I happened to be living next door, they received a subpoena for Philippines to serve jury duty in St. Louis when I was, like in the 1980s, when I was a very young nun. So, you know, she obviously was on the record somewhere. So anyway, that's our beloved Philippine, okay? And I will say this. One of the great moments of my life was to go to that canonization. And it was only by a blessed moment that I got there. That's another story. So the other person, time-wise, is Henriette de Lille, who has not been canonized yet, but whose cause is before Rome, and they're waiting for some miracles, really. But Henriette de Lille was a free woman of color from New Orleans, and we always look to things, not everything was ever always written down about different things about the Society of the Sacred Heart or about other congregations. She is the foundress of the Sisters of the Holy Family. And some of you might know this because the Sisters of the Holy Family operated St. Peter Claver until the mid-1970s right here, where Finstead Center is. All of that was the Sisters of the Holy Family. But before the Sisters of the Holy Family were there, the Religious of the Sacred Heart operated the school and the whole area there. So it comes, here in Grand Coteau, the history goes in and out kind of thing as to who's where. But, so anyway, our oral history says that Henriette de Lille received her formation as a religious at St. Michael's in Convent, Louisiana, which was one of that was the second foundation in Louisiana. And the Sisters of the Holy Family have the same oral history. So there's some consensus that probably is true because of the fact that both of those things happened. I'm sorry Caroline's not here because she could always fill in on my stories. So anyway, she was born a woman, a free woman of color from a common law marriage. She learned nursing skills and the preparation of medicines from herbs. In 1835, her mother suffered a nervous breakdown, and her mother had some assets. And so after she had taken care of her mother, that she used the rest of it to found this religious congregation for African American women. And it was first called the Sisters of the Presentation. But in 1837, when they received formal recognition, she became Superior General, and then in 1842 they changed the name to the Sisters of the Holy Family. At the time of her death, there were 12 members, but by 1950, there were over 400 sisters in several states, many of them from this area. And today, when I read the obituaries in New Orleans, I often see Sister St. John Berkeley's, or, you know, and you say to yourself, that person has some connection to Grand Coteau, you know it. So in her own will, she freed I got a typo there, she freed a slave that she owned, and obviously, probably her father or her mother, who someone else gave it to her mother, left this slave to her. And in 1988, her congregation opened the cause for her beatification. So she has not yet been beatified. So that's why she receives the title Servant of God. It means that her cause has gone before Rome. So here's St. Francis Cabrini. Now, St. Francis Cabrini is an Italian immigrant who comes to the United States to serve Italian immigrants and who are persecuted, especially in New York, but also in New Orleans. And she's invited to New Orleans because there is a lynching. And you know, when we think of that word, we think black. We don't think Italians were lynched, but in her time in the 1800s, that is why she was invited to New Orleans, was because of the lynching of 12 Italian immigrants. I think Frances Cabrini is a woman of our times right now. When we see so many people who are immigrants being persecuted before us, and when she was here. And I'm doing some work with the Cabrini Sisters and the Cabrini High School in New Orleans, and I keep telling them they need to talk more about the original vision of the founders. But she's an extraordinary woman. I'll go through a few more slides about that. But so she's born in 1850. She died in her 60s. She came to New Orleans in 1892 at the request of Archbishop Jansen. And by 1892, she had sent 3 sisters to form an orphanage, a mission, which is now Cabrini Day Nursery. She ran a free school. In 1905, Archbishop Chappelle offered another property for a boys' school. In 1905, she returned to Chicago. The orphanage was phased out in 1959, and Cabrini High School was established. And as I said, she's the first American saint naturalized, but born in 1946. She's buried on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. If you ever go to New York, she's buried at what's called the Cloisters on the Upper West Side. And her feast day was yesterday.
I knew that.
So that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about this. Henriette de Lisle died around this time. We know Philippine's feast is next Tuesday. Mother Cabrini's was yesterday. So we have, right now in the liturgical year, we have a confluence of female saints, really holy women who've gone before us. And of course, if I had done my research a little bit more, but there's a wonderful book that Catherine Mooney wrote about Philippine Duchesne. And the whole first part of the book is about the process of canonization, because she wrote the book when Philippine was going to be canonized. And the numbers of people who are religious or priests who are saints versus the lay people who are saints is like, the proportion is unbelievable different, you know. And we know there are many, 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 many holy people who did not have to be a priest or a nun to be canonized. So here's my next person that I've been doing a little research on my last one, I should probably say, because I only chose 4. Catherine Drexel. Do you know anything about Catherine Drexel?
Yeah.
She was very rich. Her father was extremely rich, a self-made man. And I read in one of my books that at some point their wealth, the assets generated $1 million per day. I know, in her time. Now imagine that. Her father did something interesting though, which was that in his will, as long as Catherine was alive, she could use the what was generated from that trust at her discretion. But once she died, it had to go to the beneficiaries that he had named in his will. So that meant that her religious order that had been founded after her father's death could not be a beneficiary of her wealth, except during her day. Fascinating, she lived to be about 97. So she had plenty of time to spend a good deal of that money. And what she's most known for is Xavier University in New Orleans, because it's her wealth and her direction and her sisters that established Xavier University. And what used to be called Xavier Prep High School in New Orleans, but it's now called St. Catherine Drexel High School. So that's her presence. And she's too spent time. Now, in my digging, I found the most interesting thing, which was that when she was just a few weeks old, her mother died. And her father remarried, and her mother was not a Catholic. Her father was a devout Catholic, and he married a Catholic, his second wife. And Catherine Drexel never thought of anyone but her stepmother as her mother. Well, her mother was a graduate of Eden Hall, which was a Sacred Heart school outside of Philadelphia. And in fact, the Drexel property was adjacent to Eden Hall's property. And her stepmother's sister was the superior at Eden Hall when Catherine Drexel was growing up. And Catherine Drexel ran through the parlor and the chapel, etc., when she was a small child. But she never went to Eden Hall. Her older sister did. So it's always this little interesting thing. And actually, I asked my favorite retired archivist, Lynn Osick, if she had ever read this, and she told me no. But then somebody else told me, oh yeah, I saw that. And I said, I don't know what to believe anymore. But anyway, I know what I read. So, and in the book I was, and I'm not quite finished the book, it's a really fascinating book. It's called From Riches to Rags. So I love reading about saints. I always have. So anyway, she's an American-born saint. So like Elizabeth Seton, she's American-born. And I named all these things. And her religious congregation, Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. Their mother house is up in Pennsylvania, near where she grew up. So that's my presentation for today. I think it's always good for us to reflect upon holy men and women who have gone before us. I love in the liturgy when we pray in the Eucharistic prayer to those who have gone before us marked with the sign of faith, because these are these people. But it's not just these people who've been recognized by the church. It's every single person that we've known who's gone before us and who has had an influence upon our own faith. And when I take time to really think about that, I start to name just a whole throne of people, just tons of people. And that's my communion of saints. So anyway, questions, thoughts?
What is the boys' school in New Orleans that Cabrini founded?
It's no longer there.
Oh.
The property is where the current Cabrini High School is on Bayou St. John. And if you go to